All right, good evening, everybody. This is a short-range squadron guide for Dystopian Wars version 3.04. Before we get into it, SRS have kind of a reputation of being a little complicated. They're not. I think they were in a previous incarnation of the game. I didn't play that version. In this version, before we get into the weeds, an SRS token is just a token with 3 attack dice. It stacks with the other SRS that are on it, and they do their damage at the very end of the turn. That's it. But, you know, there's a little more to the rules than that. They have a lot more utility, and there's a few other things that are kind of interesting to talk about. So let's get into it. Okay, so the basics. So if something has an SRS capacity, it'll tell you it's got a battle-ready capacity and a crippled capacity. It'll be something like 4.2 or 10.5. And as an operation with that ship, so before it drifts, you can place those SRS on a friendly or an enemy target. It could be a sub, could be air, it doesn't matter, within 40 inches. You can split the stack however you want. If you've got a capacity of 4, you could put 1 SRS on 4 different targets or 4 SRS on 1. The tokens can move to another target within 5 inches if the one you put them in base contact with is destroyed. Always remember that. It's kind of bizarre because you would think an SRS token would be like an escort token. It's kind of not. It really matters where you put it on the ship in case the target's destroyed. Because it's not within 5 inches of the initial target, it's within 5 inches of the token. So if you put it, you know, off in La La Land not thinking, and that target's destroyed, you might have put yourself out of range of changing to another target. And then additionally, you can use SRS in defense. So you can put them on a friendly ship. And when you do that, let's say the enemy puts no SRS on the ship you put your friendly tokens on, you can actually scramble 5 inches to another ship that actually has enemy SRS on them. However, you can't do that if there's at least 1 SRS on the ship they're on. So let's say you see somebody put, you know, 10 SRS on 1 ship in a squadron. Well, you can throw one of your, you know, SRS tokens on that ship and say the other 9 on another ship, and they can't scramble. SRS can assist a defense and assault. So what that means is that for 1 attack, because you spend them, you actually discard the tokens as you use them. They kind of count like 3 escorts, and there's no limit to how many you could spend. If you've got 10 SRS and you've got an incoming rocket attack, you could get a plus 30 to the defense dice, but just that 1 rocket attack. It's also good for SRS interceptions, and they can also give you plus 1 for your assault offense, or plus 3 to your assault defense. That's kind of good because very little can increase your assault defense, and you usually already have a very high assault defense. SRS take 3 shields to remove during an interception. That's very good. It is very difficult to remove SRS tokens even when you have a very high defense. And they tend to be fairly reliable even though they operate at the end of the turn. SRS, like I said earlier, have 3 attack dice per token. SRS are piercing and can be submerged. That's a big deal because the piercing means that they get an additional crit, and the submerged means that your opponent will get a sub-defense dice roll but they will not get like shields or obscured because it's also torpedo. So that's pretty good. And then almost everybody has combat air patrol, mine clearance, and SRS recon flight. Combat air patrol means that you're allowed to, instead of using your full SRS value, turn one, you can use your crippled value and put them anywhere on the table. You know, that's potentially good. If your crippled value is good enough to, say, cripple an enemy SRS carrier, and you've put your SRS out of range of his SRS, you know, you'll still be in his combat air patrol range, but maybe it's worth it. I find that it's usually, I play Union. I've got launch catapults, so my SRS launch further. I can usually reach anything I want. SRS mine clearance, if you need to get rid of mines, that's not necessarily a bad maneuver. You put SRS on a mine token, and then you discard an SRS, you roll a die. If it's an exploding hit, the mines are gone. And then you're allowed to keep spending SRS to try to clear that mine or clear other mines in the area. You know, potentially not bad. And then we've got recon flight. Recon flight lets you filter your deck. It's discard a card, draw a card. And that's potentially got some applications there too. You could spend 1 or 2 SRS, get rid of some junk cards, and maybe get some gas off the top of your deck. Anti-SRS. So magnetic generators are the big one right now. They're more effective against big stacks, for sure against big stacks. You can assume that they'll kill 1/6 of the planes. Why? Because the way that the magnetic generator works is I roll a die for every SRS that's on my target, and I can activate these generators during the activation of the generator carrier. So if I've got a monitor with a magnetic generator on it and it activates, anytime during the activation I can blast my magnetic. So I can actually move and get my magnetic generator still. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to roll a die for each plane that's on my target, and on an exploding hit, it's a dead plane. Let's say I've got a unit of 3 magnetic generators, I'll get to roll that 3 times. So if you've got 20 SRS on me, I roll 20 dice. Say I kill 5, then I roll 15 for the second generator. Say I kill another 5, then I roll 10 for the second generator. And you see that stack up quickly. Another thing about magnetic generators, if a ship is equipped with a magnetic generator, it will reduce heavy hits to hits. So it's a big damage reduction. You'll significantly see less damage going out if you have a magnetic generator on your target. Small stacks do well. Big stacks get jacked up. Because you got to think, if you're only doing 1/6 of the planes, if you've only got a stack of 6, you're going to maybe lose 1, and it gets like less and less the more you go down. Now, if somebody has enough bites at the apple, then they'll still do some good damage, but it's just not as bad. And then keep in mind, no matter how much magnetic, well, generally you won't have enough magnetic to stop the SRS from still doing some damage to the target. So flak is another big rule. Every 6 flak should kill a plane. Again, this is something that happens at the end of the turn, so not during a ship's activation. You roll 1 die for every flak value you have. So say you have flak 10, you'd roll 10 dice, and on an exploding hit, you remove an SRS token. The thing that's so special about this is you get to pick the SRS token, so potentially you could take out a bomber, Or if somebody has like a special squadron like the White Doves, you can take out the White Dove tokens and maybe make it so they're not the majority. And then of course, your own friendly SRS and defense. You can assume that 2 defending SRS can account for 1 attacking SRS. It's a little inconsistent because defense dice don't get explodes, but if you have that mentality as the attacking player or as the defending player, it's a good rule of thumb. All right, how to select your targets for SRS. So first off, weight of fire requires that you have twice the mass of a ship in SRS, and you get to reroll blanks. This is good, but it's not vital. Don't go out of your way to get this. It's not a big deal. It's not that often that you roll a blank, and then it's such a small reroll. A lot of times it doesn't make a difference, and you need so many SRS. If you're dealing with a mass 3 ship, you need at least 6, and that's after their defense roll. With a mass 2, you need at least 4. So about 8 SRS can cripple a mass 2, assuming these standard stats. And about every 6 defense is a dead SRS, so add extra SRS to account for that. You know, obviously there's luck involved, but these are just numbers to help guide you in making smart decisions. And then keep in mind SRS reduce the citadel of a mass 1 ship by 3, meaning that 8 hits should kill most mass 1 ships. So that's 3 SRS should be able to take out a mass 1. And then it's not realistic to kill battleships. You shouldn't have enough SRS to do it, and they have very, very high defenses usually. So it's here kind of mathematically it should take 27 SRS to destroy a battleship. So, you know, try and go for cripples and prioritize enemy SRS. Prioritize their small carriers. Small carriers are usually very easy to cripple, and you can have a lot of small stacks on the small carriers, so you're not completely put out if they have a generator, or hit the super carrier if you can. But that'll be much harder to cripple. And then you've got that big stack, which is easier to defend against and easier to hit with magnetic. And whereas you'll still do a lot of damage to that super carrier, you might not cripple it. So make sure if you try to do something like that, like for small carriers, you can kind of set it and forget it. They seldom have weapons that matter. If they've already got their SRS out, they're kind of irrelevant until the next time they activate. So if you're fairly confident you have enough SRS to cripple the small carriers, just forget them. Don't even fire another shot at them. But a super carrier, you might have to soften it up before your SRS go, or make sure you have something to follow up the next round to try and get it into crippled, hopefully before it launches its SRS. Would you ever use SRS outside of an attack run? So I think the answer is yes, and these are some scenarios you might use it. So in an assault, I think it's really more like you want around 16 dice to do max damage to a cruiser. You know, their citadel is 12, their defense is 4. That's like a 16, and if they get half of that, it's an 8. You want 8 hits. So if you have 16 assault dice, you know, barring luck, you should get your 8 hits, right? Well, there's plenty of situations where you don't have 16 assault dice, and that is where an SRS can help you out. Maybe just a couple of SRS can get you an additional catastrophic explosion in an assault, right? Maybe it's going to take you 1 or 2 tokens. Maybe it'll take you 5. But one of the nice things about this is it's very hard to defend if you use your SRS outside of an attack run. It's possible that you can burn off your SRS in an assault or in a defense before the enemy get to use their magnetic generators, and it absolutely happens before they get an intercept roll or before they get a flak barrage. So keep that in mind. If they have very heavy SRS defense, you can still push damage through with assaults. And then in another point, defense, especially assault defense. There's very little that increases your assault defense. It's really just escort ships. And +3 to an assault defense is pretty big, actually. That could definitely save one of your ships. And every 2 fighters, every 2 SRS should give you about 3 counters, hopefully. Obviously, it's up to you to decide when to use this. It might be better to just go all out and attack, and usually I think it is better to go all out and attack than to use these guys in defense, because there's probably enemy carriers you have to cripple. But if you can spare a few SRS, it could be enough to, say, stop a carrier of yours from getting crippled. Maybe 2-3 SRS will save it, or have a chance at least to save it. So let's take a look at an example here. All right, so let's say it takes around 6 SRS to cripple a regular old carrier. Your enemy puts a stack of 10 on your carrier. So you need to destroy 5 of them to have a chance of not being crippled. Obviously, you always have a chance of not being crippled, but to increase the odds significantly, you want to kill 5. Because that'll bring it to less than 6, so they should not have enough damage to take out all of your battle-ready hull. Let's just assume the carrier can destroy 1 with defenses, and there's some flak nearby that can take out another one. And let's say you have some magnetic generators nearby, so you feel confident you can take down 2 more. So that means that there is 1 SRS left unaccounted for. That'll leave them with 6. Well, just 2 SRS tokens should account for that last guy. And that may save your ship from getting crippled. It'll bring it below that 6 number that we mathematically know is very likely to just cripple the ship and make it unlikely for your ship to be crippled. You could probably spare that too. And if you have a battle-ready carrier at the end of the round and your opponent doesn't, it's a real big deal. So, like I say, just keep an eye out for situations like that. They don't always happen. A lot of times, at least the way I've seen it is people tend to kind of queen swap. It's just, oh, you've got carriers, okay, well, I'm going to take them out with mine at all costs. But if these type of situations arise, always try to keep your eyes peeled for them. Okay, so now I'm going to go over the SRS options that every faction gets, faction by faction. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time explaining this. I didn't explain it in the last video, and I got some feedback asking why I didn't also normalize points for special rules like devastating. And the truth is, I don't know how many points devastating's worth. So this unit I've invented, points per SRS equivalent. All I'm looking at is raw attack dice. An SRS token has 3 attack dice. A bomber has 5. An orca has 4. Okay? So what I do is I take the raw number of total dice that a ship can produce, divide the points of the ship by that number, and then I multiply that by 3 to get a cost of what that bomber or what that whale would do if it was a proper SRS token. If it's just SRS, I just divide the points of the ship by the number of SRS it has. And what that tells us is that tells us how many points you're paying per SRS. It does not tell us if the ship has some other special rules or special capability or special capacity that makes it good, okay? It only tells us how efficient that ship is at carrying SRS. If the only thing we care about that ship is SRS, that tells us roughly how many points we're spending on the SRS. And I think this helps reveal a lot of notions about value, you know, like the Suleiman. My gaming group for a long time thought Sultanate was hands down the strongest SRS faction because they had the Suleiman. Well, I think there was a time when the Suleiman was less than 300 points, and I would agree. Nowadays, not so much. They don't have nearly the special rules that many other factions get. So, when you see this PPSE, keep in mind we're only focused on how cheap you can get the SRS on that carrier. We're not even worried about how many you get. Normally it kind of normalizes. And we're not worried if that ship has a special application or other utility. That's going to be up to you to determine. And again, I can't account for rules. I can't tell you how many points hazardous is worth, right? I can normalize to make it so this, you know, this ship that only has 5 dice carriers or our bombers or 4 dice whales, I can tell you what they would be worth if they were SRS, but I can't tell you what devastating SRS are worth compared to hazardous SRS. So just keep that in mind. This is just a guideline. And with that guideline, 32.5 is kind of the generic PPSE cost, right? Most carriers are about 130 points and have 4 SRS tokens. That boils down to 32.5. If you see a number below 32.5, it means that is efficient at carrying SRS. If you see numbers above that, it means it's less efficient, and hopefully it has some really nice rules or really nice utility to go along with it to make it worth taking. And then anything that I state is not SRS is absolutely not SRS. It just has a similar type of token and it does a similar type of attack run, okay? This is very, very important because these tokens generally cannot be intercepted. You usually get a defense roll from them, but you cannot intercept them. Magnetic does not affect them unless the attack is an aerial attack. You still can't kill the tokens with magnetic, but you get a defensive bonus if they do an aerial attack, nor are they harmed with flak. Okay, so keep that in mind. You can't kill whales with flak. You don't get intercept rolls against Rin exosubs. And they don't get to scramble, and they don't get to change targets unless it specifically states they can. I think whales have that ability. So just remember, if it's not SRS, it is not SRS, it is not SRS, it is not SRS. The most common question I ever see is, hey, can I kill whales with flak? Hey, do I get an intercept roll against Rin exosubs? Hey, can I scramble my Rin exosubs? You can't. If it's not SRS, you can't do it. It has to say it specifically in the entry. Oh, by the way, you can reposition this target. There are a lot of tokens in this game. Most of them are not SRS, okay? So just keep that in mind. If you're asking yourself if midget subs have X ability that SRS have, they don't. Unless it says midget subs are just another name for SRS. Alright, so let's start out with the Alliance. I think the Alliance actually have good SRS. So first off, their SRS gain hazardous. Nice, that's awesome. That gets you an extra disorder. Disorder starts stacking up and it can be very, very painful. They get bomber access. That is a 5 dice SRS. Also very nice. They drop bombs, so they can't affect aerial, but it's still a lot of high damage. And I think it only takes 2 counters to take out a bomber. So they're a little more vulnerable, but as long as they have escorting fighters, you can't take them out until all the fighters are dead. All right, so let's start looking at PPSE. The Minerva, 31. That's good. That's very good. I don't think it's a 10 SRS ship, but that's points efficient. That is better than a regular carrier. The Saint Michel, 41. I think that's it's like a flying carrier or something like that. That's why you pay so many points. If you're just taking it for SRS, I'm not sure that's a good call. The Vauban, 35, not bad. The Jupiter support, I think, is actually extremely good. So it has a crippled capacity of 3. You pay the average points for it, but even when it's crippled, it doesn't lose that much SRS. Most stuff normally cripples down to 2. That's similar to the Jupiter. The Jupiter, you're not paying extra points for it, but it cripples down to 3. Excellent, 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 excellent. The Marseille, 26.8. So these are bombers, and the Marseille should have something else to support it, but that's pure efficiency. Extremely, extremely efficient. And the Voliere, 33.5, even that's not bad, right? Remember, 32.5 is the average. You're only paying an extra point. All right, so we don't see any egregiously overpaid SRS, and they have nice rules, and they have nice access to bombers, and I like all of their carriers. So Alliance is a good straightforward faction for SRS, in my opinion. Commonwealth. So their SRS get -4 against Mass 1. Still takes 3 SRS per Mass 1. I guess it's a tiny bit more efficient because you need 1 less hit to kill them. You know, whatever. It is what it is. They have a Swordwing Strike. These are 5 dice fighters that take, I think, 4 counters to remove. You get 1 per Polish fleet and +6 for, or up to +6 for 15 points. It's a nice bonus if you're playing Poles. So we look at their carriers. Their fleet carrier, 30 PPSE. That's good. You know, the Tobolsk and Anastasia, you're not buying them for SRS. If you are, that's probably a mistake. And the Bravada is just their regular carrier. It's just an average carrier. I think these guys are really boring for SRS, but they definitely can do it. Their fleet carrier and their support carrier are pretty efficient, and they do at least get some kind of a rule, but I don't think too much of it. I think there's just more interesting options in the Commonwealth. I feel like the fleet gets less interesting if you try to go SRS heavy, because you only really have 2 options. All right, the Crown. So their defensive SRS lets you re-roll blanks on an interception. You only need at least 1 to re-roll, so like, oh, you know, that's nice. So let's look at what they've got here. So the Avalon, that's the flying carrier, 40 points per SRS. Ouch. I don't know why the flying, I think flying makes them more vulnerable. If your enemy has extreme range weapons or long range weapons, then that Avalon's just gonna get tore up. The Protecteur is the submarine. It's even more expensive, and I think it's because subs have a lot of advantages. They deploy last, which means you can absolutely make sure that that ship is in the perfect position for what it wants to target. but you are paying quite a few points for those SRS. So remember, if you're just going for raw SRS, the victory is what you want, 30 points. You know, not offensively the most amazing thing. Defensively, it's fine. Arc Royal, 35. It's supposed to be a punchier victory. Even that's not bad. 35.5, if you've got some other utility out of that ship, I think that's still worthwhile. And then the Hotspurs are a little expensive, but I think you make up for that in your victory being so cheap. And your Hotspurs can get sustained. That's pretty strong for SRS, because if you think, if you're able to get weight of fire, which like I say isn't super vital, that means there's only one die face you're not re-rolling. And with somebody that's ever fired Fusillade sustained at point blank, you know that re-rolling a bunch of dice gets you a shit ton of hits. So that's potentially very good. So I like Crown. I think Crown's competent. You need to have some other reason for taking the Avalon besides pure SRS. I think it's a big disadvantage to pay that much for your SRS tokens. The Protecteur, I think, is very expensive for SRS, but it at least has utility that I can understand for SRS. You know, it is submerged. It's still going to be vulnerable to SRS because they can just do a torpedo attack run on it. But, you know, potentially that'll be some defense against something. The Empire, so this is important. Our boy Stuart confirmed that the Empire is never going to have SRS outside of the Koreans that can be taken seriously. And the Korean SRS options are horrible as far as efficiency. I think they're just horrible. They're kind of tanky, but they're so expensive, it's ridiculous. I don't know, I don't like them. I think they're just too expensive to use, personally. I could certainly be proven wrong, but, you know, we'll see. So, Japanese frontline, get a few free SRS. It's one SRS token on rounds 2 and 4 for every unit that's in that battle fleet that's still on the table. So let's say I have a front line of 3 units and it is round 2. I would get 3 free SRS tokens that I could launch from those ships. Okay, so Rin exosubs, these are not SRS, but they are very, very similar. Remember, not SRS, not SRS, not SRS. No rules that apply to SRS apply to Rin exosubs, all right? It's just they operate in a similar fashion, deal all their damage at the end of the turn per token, all right? So what's nice about them, 40-inch range. They have the full range of a real SRS. They have 5 dice, all right? They've got more dice than a regular SRS, although that's kind of normalized because the Hachiman, which is the flagship carrier, has 30 attack dice essentially of Rin, while a regular super carrier has 30 attack dice worth of SRS. Okay, so don't get too excited about the high dice. And in fact, your Mizuchi have less attack dice than typical support carriers. Your typical support carriers will have 36 dice. The Mizuchis will only have 30 dice. So even though it looks exciting, like, ooh, 5 dice, you get the same or less as you would if you were running SRS. But these are a little stronger damage-wise. You either get a submarine attack that has homing and devastating, all right? So that could potentially be a lot more damage, but they get sub-defense. Or you have an air attack that has homing and piercing. So homing is reroll blanks, so that's essentially like they always have weight of fire, even if you just have one of them. Like I say, reroll blanks isn't super crazy, but it's a nice thing to have. And also keep in mind, if somebody has a magnetic generator, you don't want to do the air attack because that'll turn your heavy hits into hits, because it's an aerial attack, even though these are not SRS. Alright, so Rin Excess subs. You can't use them in defense, of course. They're not SRS. You can't use them. I think they do have mine clearance. But they don't have recon flight or anything like that. And they can attack any target. There's no limitation on what you can attach them to fight. Obviously, if you fight an air unit, you have to use the aerial attacks. Sub-attacks can't hurt them. And if you're fighting a sub, you need to use the sub-attack, because aerial attacks can't hurt them. Alright, so now let's look at this. Hachiman. Less than 30 points. 29 points for the Rin subs. That is a great value as far as super carriers are concerned. You know, it's got decent stats, decent super carrier stats. Excellent value. You can see that you get the same amount of dice as a super carrier, but it's cheaper than all the other super carriers. And if I just jump down to Mizuchi, you'll see Mizuchi, you're actually paying a little extra for your Rin Exo subs. But Mizuchi, so two things. The Hachiman has Shadow Hunter, which means you get to redeploy it, which means it's better than being a sub. And the subs are subs, which means they deploy last. So you can really make sure that you are in range of what you want to be in range of, or you're out of range of what you want to be out of range of. I really like it. I like that utility. I think it's worth it. Keep in mind, Rins don't have like combat sub-patrol or anything. They have to be in range if they're going to attack it. So, okay, so Jan Madao, 54 points per SRS. This is like a 550 point super carrier. It's defensively probably pretty strong. It's got a lot of hull points in battle ready. And it has a 5 dice generator. But oh my goodness, that is so expensive. You know, if you're going to do that, you need to do all in SRS. I mean, technically, it takes so much to get this thing crippled. It'll be dumping 10 SRS, probably several rounds of the game. I think even if the enemy is trying to focus it down, but that's so expensive. And then to the regular ships, so the Miyagi and the Okinawa, you see those points are crazy high, but they're not really SRS carriers, they're really line ships, right? The Miyagi's really a monitor, and the Okinawa is really a line cruiser, okay? Think of them more like expensive line cruisers, because their crippled SRS is the same as their battle-ready SRS. So they'll be throwing 2 SRS regardless of how damaged they are. Also, they have regular hull distribution, right? Most carriers have a hull distribution of like 3-5. These guys have 4-4. So don't use them like support carriers. They're not support carriers. Just use them as line ships if you are going to use them. And instead of saying like, oh my gosh, I'm paying 35 points for 2 SRS, look at it more like you're saving 130 by not having to take another carrier. You know, you could just take these instead of Osaka or something like that. I would definitely recommend taking the Osaka though, but they definitely have a place. Don't discount them. Mizuchi, these are kind of be your main support carrier in my opinion. Not quite as many dice as most support, but it's what you have. And then the Quan Shao Skykeep. They're 40 points per SRS equivalent. You know, I don't know. It'll be up to somebody to show me that they're good. I've seen them get torn up too easily. I just haven't seen any good play out of them. They're just real expensive. But again, maybe they're defensively tough enough that it's worth the points you're paying. I'll have to see it in game to justify it being worth that many. But like I say, I think Rin play is good. The Hachi Man gets you Rin so cheap, it kind of makes up for the Mitsuchi being a little more expensive. I think the Korean stuff's just too expensive. I'll have to see it in play more. The only times I've seen it, it was just a joke. Enlightened, this is my SRS pick. I think this is the best SRS faction in the game, period. You get no way to fire, but it takes 4 counters to intercept. This is a great trade. As I've already discussed, rerolling blanks is not that powerful. But one of the things that's super powerful about SRS is the fact that it takes 3 counters to remove an SRS token. That's very hard to do. These guys need 4, right? So that means somebody rolls their intercept roll. There could be up to 3 wasted counters in that, right? It's crazy. I like it. Number 2, this is my favorite capability of Enlightened. So they can eat up SRS with their heavy particle cannon. Okay, each SRS gives +2 dice to the attack roll. This is a devastating gunnery attack. Okay, so they get no defense roll. This happens before flak. It happens with no intercept roll, right? And you might even get it off before they've hit the stack with their magnetic generators. So they have no defense against it, and a heavy particle in itself is nasty, right? A heavy particle at closing range is 9 dice. So that means, if you want to think about it, just front-loading your SRS damage, the heavy particle cannon dice could potentially make up for the dice that you're losing for up to 9 SRS, you know? It's crazy. I think it's very good. It avoids a lot of defenses, and it avoids, in my opinion, the main weakness of SRS, which is they do their damage at the very end of the round. You could front load this. Maybe you get the damage off before the guy activates. Maybe you force him to activate in a bad position, giving you another advantage, right? I think it's great. I think it's wonderful. So the next thing they've got is they have a number of ships that are just 1-0. And you don't really pay points for the SRS. The Chatlet and Ulysses are the points I would expect to pay for a recon cruiser and a line cruiser, except they also happen to have an SRS capacity. And then the ammo is not unreasonably priced either. So just keep in mind, they're not really SRS carriers, but if you need a spotter or just, incidental SRS, right? I like Ulysses as line ships, and just to have an extra 2 or 3 or 4 SRS to eat up with a heavy particle cannon, it's nice. So, like I say, I like that, but I'm not putting them into the equation, because it's like, I'll tell you what their PPSE, I don't know how this changed to M, but PPSE is just the price of the ships, and it's crazy high, but you're not using them for the efficiency of taking them. Okay, so let's get into it. The Descartes, 38 points. These are not SRS, these are Orcas, okay? Instead of getting weight of fire, which is double the mass, and you get reroll blanks, this is greater than the mass, and you get sustained. Nice. You don't get an intercept roll against them, but you do get sub-defense. I like Orcas all right. On the Descartes, they have the full 40-inch range, and this price of the Descartes, you need a 10-point upgrade to take Orcas. I'm accounting for that 10-point upgrade in his cost, but you see he's not very efficient at it. And I don't think Orcas are so great that they beat SRS, especially in Enlightened. Right? I think their SRS on their own are good enough that whales are a little redundant unless you're taking the sperm whales, in which case with the cart's your only option. The Icarus, very, very, very cheap SRS, but it's very, very, very easy to cripple. If there's some way to stop the Icarus from being crippled round one, I'd probably consider taking it. But I think that the chances of getting crippled is just too high. It's just, I think it's just too risky to take. And then, what are our other options? The Nansen. I did get some feedback telling me the Nansen's great. I will say that as far as SRS efficiency, it's poor, points-wise. Now, it does have an SRS capacity of 6. It's got 7 armor, so it's actually lower armored than most supercarriers, and it's got significantly less SRS than most supercarriers. Like I say, I'm not sold on the Nansen. That does not mean that it's bad, but I think as far as just a pure SRS carrier, you need to have something else that the Nansen is fulfilling in order to want to take it. Because even the Thule, as you can see, is more points efficient as far as an SRS carrier. Which seems strange and counterintuitive, but if I was going to do SRS on these guys, I would just take a dataless tether ship. I'd take Pythias, and I'd take Plinius. And so let's keep going, and I'll go over that. So the Plinius, you see that you're paying a little bit extra, but the Plinius is, I think, the tankiest carrier in the game. It has a crippled SRS capacity of 3, and it's got 4 battle-ready hull. I think it's the only carrier that does that, and it's got regular defensive stats otherwise, which is very rare for Covenant. Most of their stuff is just junk. So the Plinius, very reliable as far as carriers. It'll be much harder for your opponent to cripple them, and even when they cripple them, you've still got a crippled capacity of 3, so you don't care too much. The Vesalius, you're paying 33.75 points for Orcas. These Orcas only launch 35 inches. I don't think they're worth it. I like the idea of whales, but you're overpaying, in my opinion. You could have just taken, well, I guess they're a little cheaper than Plinius, but you're getting a lot out of Plinius, and you're not getting a lot out of Vesalius. In fact, the Plinius can wave lark, and the Vesalius can't. And the Vesalius has shorter range, and the Vesalius can only do Orcas, so it's here or there. But here's something I like, is the Pythias. So let me get back to what I was saying earlier. The Pythias are a Mass 1 flyer. They have 2-0 SRS. If you have a Daedalus nearby, every time a Pythias is destroyed, you'll roll a die, and if you roll a counter or heavy counter, so 1 in 3, it just gets resurrected. They just repair it, and it's back in the air. Like I say, I think Pythias and Plinius are enough for your SRS needs, and Pythias are so cheap that they make up for the expensiveness of the Plinius, and the Daedalus is a Fortunes of War ship, so you're going to take it anyway. Your only other Fortunes of War option for Enlightened is, I think, like a 500 and something point ship. So you're probably taking your Daedalus, right? Might as well take some Pythias with it. It'd be nice if Pythias had a shield generator like the other mouse one, because then they'd get a shield bonus from the Daedalus, but they do not. They're just going to benefit from the repair. All right, Imperium. So these guys seem like they're pretty decent too. Most of their efficiency comes from their flagships. They have bomber access, and then they have each Prussian support fleet gives them, like, a beginning of the game stack of bombers that they can put on a flagship. So this was surprising to me. The Ice Maiden is actually a good value carrier. That blew me away. I thought it was trash. Everybody keeps telling that they would never take one and they're garbage. But actually they're points efficient for a carrier, and if while you're using them as a carrier, that's worth it alone. And they have some decent guns on them. But I guess they're easy to focus down or something. I don't know exactly. What else we got here? The Stark. That is the blimp. You're paying a lot for that because it's a flyer. Like I say, I think you overpay for flyers in general in the game right now. The Tempelhof is the fleet carrier, and the Tempelhof Heavy is the fleet carrier that carries bombers. You see that those are both point efficient. Bombers tend to be more point efficient because they have more dice. But remember, the bombers are not defensively as strong. You really, really need to bring defensive SRS to make the bombers worth it. The Skalte is 33, fine. The Prince Eugen, that is just a Stark, but that's a special character Stark. It's more expensive. And the Wilhelmina is a named Ice Maiden. And you see, even that isn't crazy inefficient. So that's nice. The Conrad is your main support carrier, your only support carrier. And you pay a little bit extra for it. So they can get a voltaic upgrade that's pretty meh. I think the one thing I'd say about voltaic is maybe it'll help you out. Because they get you generator shutdowns on their crits. And that could be nice to just kind of, not guarantee. People can always repair a generator shutdown, and they probably will if they really need it. But it could be nice to kind of push out generator shutdown tokens. Sultanate. Portal Strike. So like I say, there was a video by Love and War Games where he had an expert come on the scene, and he really told us Portal Strike, it's nice for SRS. The SRS don't eat the portals, but Portal Strike is actually more utility for the rest of the army to construct defensive portals, or not like rear line portals to shoot stuff through, or to use for other things. So I don't rate it too high as far as an SRS ability, but that's up to you. So the Abydos, this is a skimming carrier, 79 points. That's very bad. It's again, it's more like a utility ship. You're not taking it for the SRS, you're taking it for the other utility. Make sure you want that other utility. Do not take it if you're just trying to get SRS. Suleiman. It's not good value anymore, anyway. 34.5. That's pretty high, especially when you can consider it the top copy. 30 points. Okay, it has less. It has 8. The Suleiman has 12, but you make up for it in those points. And the Constantinople is good value too. Maybe if you're taking top copy in Constantinople, that should be enough. That's 20 SRS. I think that's good enough. It's more points efficient. The Suleiman doesn't do anything else for you besides carry SRS. And the top copy does a lot more for you besides just carry SRS. It's got those fabulous portals. So I don't know about the Suleiman, but and Constantinoples are fine. There's nothing wrong with them. There's nothing special about them, but that's pretty cheap. All right, and now we'll get to my faction, the Union. So they have 45-inch SRS. It's kind of a big deal. I've never pulled it off, but technically I should be able to set my carriers up so that I'm out of range of enemy SRS and they have to use combat air patrol on me, and that I can hit them. It's just never been able to shake it out with deployment. I've never been able to deploy them late enough to take advantage of it. But that could be very powerful if you can pull it off, because think about that. You'll have your full SRS capacity. You should be able to cripple their carriers, and they should not be able to cripple yours with just combat air patrol. The Enterprise, not super points efficient, but it's good enough. It's a super carrier. It does have 2 heavy rocket batteries on, I think, every facing. So that's not bad. I still use the heavy rocket batteries on it. And we also get tactical cavitation. Never forget. That gives you shrouded and no homing versus sub. Very good for Rin exosubs, right? That means that the Rin exosub has to use the aerial attack on you, so they lose the devastating. And then maybe if you've got, this is just kind of out there advice, maybe if you've got a magnetic generator on like an Independence or another flagship, suddenly those Rin have a real crappy choice to make. Either they've got to deal with the magnetic generator, reducing the attacks of the damage of their aerial attack, or they've got to deal with the shrouded and no homing of the tactical cavitation. And you know, that helps against other tokens too, like whales. But Liberty, you only get 6 SRS on the thing. It's supposed to be like a battle carrier. I think it has 2 heavy slots. It's just crazy inefficient, and it's not significantly cheaper than the Enterprise. I don't know why you'd take one. It is cheaper than the Enterprise, and it does give you some SRS, but I think the Enterprise is even tougher than it is. I'll try them out. You know, maybe I'll see the light, but at least as a pure SRS carrier, you have to get some other utility out of it to make up for how expensive it is for the SRS. But when I remember looking at it, it didn't even seem to have that utility, in my opinion. And then the only other carrier we have are the Roanoke. So the average price, 32.5. So they can get arc, and they can also get sustained if you have arc. So what I like about arc is it's potentially 2 disorder, right? Arc gives you a disorder anytime you get a crit. They're piercing, so you get a crit roll for dealing damage, and then you get a crit roll if you beat the Citadel. That's 2 extra disorder on top of the damage you're already doing. Arc also ignores shield generators. You know, I think the White Doves are a good option. And then if you put them in a Pipeworks fleet, they'll also have sustained. And we talked about this earlier with the Hotspur. Sustained is pretty nice on SRS if you can get it, because if you do have weight of fire, there's only 1 die face you're not re-rolling. So, like I say, I think it's pretty decent. I got no complaints about Union SRS. You see, you don't have a lot of crazy options, but the few options you have are decent. I got no complaints about the Enterprise. I got no complaints about the Roanoke. 45-inch SRS is a pretty good advantage. So that's going to wrap it up for SRS. Hopefully you saw they're not as complicated as they used to be. In fact, I think they're very simple now. They're very powerful. They do have kind of bonds of damage, right? The first time I saw a devastating SRS attack was against the Icarus. It was 20 SRS on the Icarus, and the Icarus put you know, like 10 SRS on itself to try to defend, and it was just a joke. It just got wrecked. I think it took like 70 hits or something crazy like that, even after all of its defense. And then I realized, I was like, oh, there's no adequate defense for SRS. Now, the Icarus is very weak on its own, right? But I was just like, there's nothing this player could have done. As soon as this guy committed 20 SRS to that Icarus, it was just wrecked. If you just played a little more flak, you would have had it. It's like, no, flak is terrible. And that player learned that. They played, I think they were playing like some Iron Skies or something, and they had like 1 billion flak, and it never did anything all game. You know, sometimes it'd destroy one plane if he was lucky. But like I say, there are some other tokens, assault tokens, but again, just keep in mind, if it's not SRS, it doesn't follow any of the SRS rules. But yeah, I think that's about it. If there's something you think I got wrong, of course, please let me know. I'll try to take it into account. I feel kind of bad because the one guy that did give me feedback, I just disagreed, right? I am acknowledging, you know, maybe the non-send isn't so bad, but you have to have some other utility out of it to take it. You cannot take it as just a pure SRS carrier, if that's all you're getting out of it. It is fairly tough out of the options that the Enlightened get, but I mean, when you're sitting here saying, oh, well, a Thule is more points efficient, then maybe there's a problem. But like I say, I hope this was a help to you. I hope it helps you, if you really like SRS, to pick a faction. Seeing everything laid out and compared, I think makes it a lot more clear as to who's kind of got a leg up with SRS, right? And who do I think has the leg up in the SRS game? Alliance and Enlightened. I think Hazard is as good. Alliance have really good access to SRS. And then Enlightened have a unique capability to front load their SRS damage, which I think is excellent, excellent, excellent. I love it. Union, Alliance get this also, but Union also have Pacifier Assault. They could be very, very powerful assault tokens. And actually, they kind of need backup from SRS to max out their damage more efficiently. You can make stacks of 2 tokens that you can't split. You want 3 to max your damage out against a cruiser, but you can't do 3. You have to either put 2 or 4, right? So there's some wasted potential in there. Well, if you back them up with SRS, potentially you'll front load some of that damage. But honestly, the SRS probably could have done more damage on their own. You have to have some reason for wanting to front load that damage to do that, in my opinion. Anyway, I'm going to stop rambling. Again, like I say, I hope this was helpful to you. If it helps you pick up SRS faction, or maybe it's revealed that maybe you're overpaying for SRS, then I hope that'll be of assistance. And if it's helped you understand the rules for SRS and kind of some of the numbers behind SRS, then it's just right. That's what I made this video for.